Hi, it's me. This is the latest episode of Built From Scratch, and it is, believe it or not, the 8th of October, which means it's... I don't actually know how long it is since I recorded the last one. I think it's probably close to 2 weeks, which is really bad, but that's just the way things are going at the moment. The effects of COVID-19, family holidays, illness, and other bits and pieces, including the fact that we've temporarily moved house, means that it's been really difficult to get on top of, to get stuck into doing any work. That explains the change of background, incidentally. What I've been doing so far is living at my actual house, and I'm not sure about this lighting. Hang on a second. That might be a bit better. Been living at my house and working in the top room of my mum's house. Serves as quite a good office space, but we're actually living there at the moment because we're having an extension built on this house, and it's at the stage now where they've done all the preparatory stuff outside, so now they're smashing the kitchen to pieces and building a new one, and consequently I'm now working in one of the rooms in our house, which is out of the way of the building enough that it still serves as an office. So that's that, and that is one of the things that I've been spending a bit of time on recently, because obviously it took some effort moving stuff between the houses and getting set up at my mum's house, especially since we've got a couple of small kids to cater to in terms of making the new place safe for them. So this update is going to be a bit of a mishmash of the small bits of work I've done these last couple of weeks. It'll get us up to date, and it's better than nothing. So I'll just crack on through those notes. So my first thing that I wrote is that referencing a Friday. It's a Thursday today. I'm gonna guess this was 2 weeks ago tomorrow. Whilst Friday involved half a day of shifting boxes around, I did do some kind of work because I listened to a load of podcasts whilst I was doing that. So that is a legitimate thing. I wasn't working on the website at all, but I know that before I started working on this project, I listened to a month's worth of podcasts about online marketing and related stuff. I kind of enjoy listening to them, and they're certainly quite useful. I remember thinking at the time that in any given episode there are likely to be 2 or 3 things mentioned which are of particular value and the sort of thing you don't want to forget, but inevitably you are going to forget stuff like that over time, and therefore I should occasionally go back and listen to them again once I was actually embroiled in the project itself. So getting a little bit of spare time to do that is no bad thing, really. In theory, my sort of daily schedule is supposed to include at least sort of 10-20 minutes of listening to podcasts or reading relevant stuff or watching relevant videos. But the truth is, at the start of the day when I sit down, I've generally got actual tasks that I want to get stuck into, so I haven't necessarily been doing that. So that had some value. In the same vein, today, so I guess this is the day after, I read a few articles off the monthly Moz email roundup. So that is the company that used to be called SEO Moz. For years now they've been called Moz, and they've been doing an email roundup where they just email you the best online marketing type articles or resources that they've come across in the last month. I think they're often off their own site. I think sometimes they're not. But anyway, it tends to be quite a well-curated list of articles to read. So I actually have to sometimes restrict myself there of how much time I end up reading through those. I tend to just pick the couple that I think are most relevant to me and read them. So I've then put that I tried to figure out why the hreflang tags that I'd implemented were not appearing on a couple of pages. So that's fairly straightforward to understand what the problem was there. I put those tags on every single page on both of the websites, on almost all of those pages and posts. They had appeared just as you would expect, but on two of the pages, they weren't appearing at all for some reason. The next note was from a different day, and I've written fiddlesticks. It's the 1st of October and I've not been back to work. Too much other shizzle going on. On to the next day. Finally did of it. Time to do end of month tasks. One thing that I did today was to decide that my process for recording and saving receipts was too clunky and too thorough. So I pared it down a bit. Obviously at the moment I don't have too many receipts coming in, so it wasn't a big deal, but it just struck me that it was taking me a disproportionately large amount of time to do this process each month, like an hour or so, which just seemed daft. And to be honest, half of that time was spent just reviewing how I was supposed to be doing it before I actually did it. So I've just changed that system slightly so that literally all I'm doing now is when I spend some money on the business, at the time of spending the money, I make a note of it directly in the accounting software, and then don't bother about the receipt or the invoice at all at that point. And then when the invoice or receipt inevitably comes into my email account, whenever I get round to looking at that, I just forward it to somewhere where it can sit forever, basically. And I think at the moment that will serve me perfectly well. I'm sure when you have a bit of a sizable business going on with fairly substantial purchases occurring, you probably need a significantly more robust system than that, but I think that will do me for now. So on to another day. I haven't actually noted which dates these were, but I guess this was a handful of days ago now. So I've written that I read up on guest posting and drew 3 conclusions. So just briefly, guest posting is where you approach the owner of another website and ask if they would like for you to provide them with content, so generally one article, and in exchange for getting given that free content, they will allow you to place a link in that content to your website. So you generate a link which helps with the authority of your website, but also if the website that you're guest posting on gets good amounts of decent quality traffic, then you will actually get some of that traffic coming to your website. So depending on your point of view and also which websites you approach, either of those two things may have the more significant impact in your opinion. I suppose what I'm getting at there is that there's a sort of prevailing thing amongst sort of ultra white hat SEOs that if you're going to do guest posting, you should only do it to get traffic. Google have said they don't like it. It's a method of manipulating your link profile. And I think most of them suggest that you should actually not even care about whether you're placing a link, or if you do, you should ask for it to be given the no follow attribute, so that you don't get in any bother with Google. I'm a little bit skeptical about Google's ability to tell if you are doing guest posting for links if you do it in a non-automated, well thought out, in an intelligent manner, essentially. I think if you're doing one guest post every several weeks on a website that you've researched and have determined is not anywhere in the region of spammy in terms of the number of guest posts it allows or the number of outbound links it has, then I think you'd be absolutely safe. And therefore, if you wanted to do it for the purposes of link building, I think that probably works and is safe. It's something I would definitely consider doing in the future as and when I get time to do so. And I'll be doing it with a kind of a mixed view of that. Getting some direct relevant traffic, brilliant, but building a reasonable quality link, that's great too. I'll just be careful about it. And sorry to go on about this, but the two things kind of go hand in hand anyway. If I'm finding places that have traffic that I want, then getting a link from them, and if I'm only approaching sites like that, then any link profile I build out of that work is going to look pretty legitimate anyway, because it kind of just naturally will be. So I've written that I drew 3 conclusions about guest posting. It's kind of interesting sometimes reading these notes back as I make these videos, because I haven't reviewed these notes since I wrote them. So let's see if I agree with myself. Number 1, it may currently be one of Google's focuses shutting down spam. Okay, yeah, I've read a couple of things that suggested in the last year or so this might be something they are focusing on. Point 2, I would probably avoid any site that mentions allowing guest posts. Yeah, so I think I do agree with that. As I was just saying a second ago, I would be looking at sites that were relevant and didn't appear to be spammy, but I was thinking on that day, and I think I agree with it now, that what I might actually do, before I say this, as a precursor, I've read a couple of articles where people are advising about how to do quality guest posting, and they say in order to find targets you should do things like searching Google using modifiers like so you would search for your topic. So if you sell computers, you might type in computers and then modify your search with phrases like if you want to write for us, or guest posting or guest blogging opportunities, stuff like that. So in other words, you'll find sites that are relevant to you and appear to be advertising the ability to do guest posting for them. I would argue that whilst that means you will find yourself talking to people who are positively switched on to the idea of working with guest bloggers, it means you are immediately in the realms of the grey area of spam, or maybe very distinctly in the black areas, at which point you're going to have to be very careful to make sure you don't get caught out. So I think what I would do is actually just search out sites that I would like to write for, irrespective of whether they're showing any sign of allowing guest posting. And I would then just approach them. And whilst I'm sure those any approaches that I made to them would be largely ignored or rebuffed, I think that I would only do this on the back of a substantial portfolio of well-written articles on my own site, and possibly even in the context of having built up a little bit of a profile in this industry in terms of social media, networking, that sort of thing. Although I'm not sure about that bit. That might just take too long, be too much effort for it to be sort of applicable to a guest posting effort. But certainly as a minimum, I will be able to demonstrate a large portfolio of well-written articles. So anyone who I emailed or approached about doing this, even if they weren't into the idea, all I would really need them to do is take that small step of just looking at a few of the articles that I've written, and hopefully they would recognise that they were good enough, that maybe this is something worth thinking about. And so I think what I'm trying to say is I would accept the very low sort of conversion rate of those approaches in exchange for the avoidance of not particularly great links. Because obviously any links you do get on sites that you have approached, like cold called, that don't do guest posting particularly, are going to be excellent. Google is definitely not going to be able to tell them apart from pure editorial links. Point 3 was that SEMrush only allow posts that feature links to non-personal websites, for example YouTube, which sounds like quite a good way of doing things. Yeah, so this is a different sort of way of using it, or it's a different way of looking at it. So SEMrush is a very popular search engine optimization platform, and they have a fairly successful blog, which apparently which does invite guest posting, but one of the apparently many conditions of being allowed to guest post on there is that you cannot link to your website, basically. No matter how amazing this article is that you're going to provide them with, they just don't let you do that. All they will allow you to do is link to, for example, a YouTube channel, which means that the only benefit you can get out of it is the traffic type benefit, and even then it's sort of indirect, unless you are a YouTuber. Obviously in my case that wouldn't be the case, that wouldn't be the situation. Overuse of case. I would be getting traffic from SEMrush to my YouTube channel, on which I've obviously got a link to the website, so I would be hoping, if I was going to make any money out of that SEMrush article, is that it would be by people finding the way to the YouTube channel, then coming to the site and converting in whatever way I was trying to get them to convert there. But the point is, that is something that would be worth doing potentially, because if you're in the right kind of field, then traffic coming from SEMrush, even if you've lost quite a lot of that traffic via your YouTube channel, is still going to be quite valuable. Oh, well, that was a bit of a... was that a bit long-winded? Yes, it was. Never mind. I then noted that I got a response from the freelancer Oh, hang on, I'm not sure I mentioned this. I don't think I did. The day before this, I'd emailed a freelancer about trying to get them to figure out the issue with the missing hreflang tags, because I'd spent some considerable time, I think 2, 3, maybe 4 hours trying to figure this one out, and for the first time, both in the Wave to the project, but also the couple of websites I've put together in the past, this is about the first ever time I've come across a technical issue that I didn't seem to be able to find the answer to. And it was wasting quite a lot of time. So I thought, fine, I'm going to do what I've been telling myself I really should do in general, which is to get freelancers or some kind of help to move things along quicker than I can do just by doing it myself. So I went on People Per Hour, my favoured freelancer platform. I say favoured, I haven't actually really experimented with any of the other ones. I'm aware that Upwork is really big these days, so I should probably check that out at some point, but currently I'm on People Per Hour. I got a response from the guy. He's a chap, he has actually helped me with something very minor on a website before, and he lives in the same city that I do. The reason I've done that, which is on purpose, there is a setting within People Per Hour which allows you to choose people within a given location. So I went for Sheffield, and I just figured that if he turns out to be a good guy who knows what he's on about, and if this project turns into a proper business and I have use for a sort of WordPress developer frequently, it might be quite nice if it was someone down the road that I could go and talk to in person if I felt the need to. So I went for someone local. He got back to me asking for login details. So I had to have a quick read around people's thoughts on security issues to do with giving random people login details to WordPress. And the answer basically turned out to be you're going to have to do it if you want developers to help with your website, and there is a small but inherent risk in doing so, and the way to mitigate that risk is to back up your website frequently, and that is something I already do, so I was able to just get on with that. After that, this must have been a fairly proper day's work, I think, because I've got a few notes for this day. I ended up going down a big rabbit hole about guest posting, referral spam, reposting articles, and an excellent article on SEMrush about how machine learning is likely making Google themselves oblivious to how their algorithm works. So the point of making that note, I think, was just to point out that I do have a tendency sometimes to waste time, basically, reading things that are not acceptably useful, to make that use of time worth it. So I'm basically telling off myself there. The only thing that is worth noting in a slightly more positive vein is that last article, it was good, well, partly because it just kind of agrees with something that I've thought a couple of times recently, which is the actual headline of the article. The point of the article was the guy was arguing that Google, in his opinion, have had a downward trend in the last couple of years of explaining changes that they're making to their algorithm. They used to sometimes make big changes, announce them, and explain what it was all about, but apparently that's been going off the boil in recent years. And he thinks that's primarily because, as they've integrated machine learning into the algorithm, it's had a larger and larger impact. And whilst I'm nothing like knowledgeable about machine learning enough to try and explain this in one of these videos, my own understanding of it is good enough to know that it's very difficult to understand what is going on in a machine learning algorithm, even if you're one of the developers who actually programmed the sort of neural network which is now in operation, because it is, in a sense, kind of making its own decisions. So you can't exactly understand what's going on any better than you can understand what's going on in the head of a biological creature. And therefore they're not explaining their algorithm changes that much these days because they perhaps don't really understand them themselves. What that I think means for SEO and online marketing, incidentally, is that perhaps for the first time since Google's been around, the idea that the only way to really win in the long run is to just have a quality website and do quality work on it, have good content, do things naturally. Prior to machine learning, I would tend to be somewhat dismissive of that suggestion, which has been put out there by Google and various other people for years, that that's the only way of doing things now, really. But I was fairly dismissive of that suggestion because it seemed that there was going to be, although there would always be a limit to the power of Google's algorithm, and that if you did things that they weren't into but did them carefully enough, you could reap some rewards without taking too much of a risk. But I tend to believe that the advent of machine learning in things potentially destroys the ability to do that, or at least makes it so difficult that there's no return on investment in trying to do anything a little bit cheeky anymore. So just create a good website, basically. Final note for this day: realised it may be possible to clone a selection of pages across WordPress sites, which would be useful because doing what I refer to as my media stack process for 2 sites is a bit of a drag. So yes, since for these last couple of weeks, since I've had 2 websites up and running, all the processing steps that I have to do after making these videos have well, not all of them have doubled, but some of them have doubled. And it's made what was already a fairly significant process just that bit longer, and in a way that not only is it longer, but it's very much more boring because it is literally just duplication of some tasks. So I did a quick bit of research and came to the conclusion that it looks like there are ways of copying just individual pages across. As you know, if you've been watching these videos, 3 or 4 weeks ago I did a full site migration, or well, a cloning of the site. So I already know that you can copy an entire site, but I don't want to do that because there are some differences between the sites. So I'm not in a position to just be able to, once every week or month or whatever, update the secondary site by just dumping the entire primary site on it. I need to be able to just update or clone specific pages, and it looks like you can do that. I think it's actually part of the WordPress core functionality these days, but I've yet to properly get on top of that. I think that might be a job for tomorrow. So on to the next day or another day, and I got another response from the freelancer on People Per Hour suggesting a child theme instead of elements. So what this is about is, as I previously explained, I'm using part of the theme that I'm using on WordPress to add in these hreflang tags to the site. What he's suggesting, he got back to me and said basically, yeah, this is a strange conundrum, I don't understand what's going on. But I would suggest getting rid of all those elements, then creating a child theme, which is this sort of it's kind of like putting the entirety of your website on one side so that you can make changes to it which won't be affected if the actual central theme gets updated, and then putting those tags back in by using the child theme. I'm sure that would have worked, but the problem there is that he was saying I should then put those tags in the header of the child theme, but that would have meant they were site-wide changes. In other words, the same change is placed into every single page of the website, which wouldn't work because... Hang on a sec. Sorry, just to explain, I'm using the Otter transcription app to transcribe this video as I'm talking, and it just came up with a message saying I was out of data for the month, but I'm not, because I'm now on the premium plan, so I've got thousands of minutes left. So that was just a bug. It seems to still be working, is the good news. It hasn't cut out what I've been saying. Right, so back to what I was on about. So I couldn't use that solution because the nature of these hreflang tags is that they need to be different on every page, so a site-wide solution doesn't work. So I wrote back to him saying that and sort of asking what else he thought. At that point, I also went back to asking the theme support guys for their thoughts on the situation. And then I solved the problem. What it turned out to be, I can't remember how I figured this out, but I just had a moment of clarity and realised that in these elements of the theme, there is a drop-down menu as part of the process of creating an element where you can tell it where in the website you want the thing that you're adding into the element to exist. And previously, for every page that was a page as opposed to a post, I'd been selecting the option in that drop-down menu that was called page, which is fairly logical. And I'd then been telling it which page I was talking about, which is part of the functionality of how those elements work. But I noticed that one of the options in that menu was front page, And so I scanned down a bit further and realised that another option was blog. And the two pages that these elements weren't working properly for were my homepage and my blog page. In other words, the page where all of the separate blog posts that I've got are listed. So I tried changing generic page to the specific relevant page for those two pages, and straight away it worked. So it was as simple as that in the end. It's stuff like that that can be very frustrating, because whilst I really like this theme that I'm using, it's well designed, support is excellent, it's frustrating that they would have just decided to have some of those specific pages listed out and then not have some kind of notification on that page to point out that if you choose generic page for one of these things that has been given a specific option, it's not going to work. However, I don't want to get too critical. It is a great theme, they do a great job, and I mean, it's very easy to sit here and criticise. It's infinitely harder to be the person actually making the product. And I'm just glad that I found the solution. Amusingly, since I found it before either the freelancer chat was able to get back to me or support, I then had the joy of writing back to both of them and saying, I've solved the problem. So I then put that, since kind of because of doing that bit of work, I was getting a bit more comfortable with using elements in Generate Press. So it occurred to me that I've got another plugin that I use called Insert Headers and Footers, which I always use to put a Google Analytics script into a WordPress site. But adding these bits of extra code in is precisely what elements are for, I now understand. So I just decided I'd spend a couple of minutes deleting that plugin and pasting that Google Analytics code into a new element instead, which worked, so that's great. I'm pretty sure it's worked. I haven't actually checked Google Analytics to check it's still receiving data, but I'm sure it will be. And that's just the kind of thing that is worth doing, because plugins are a security risk with WordPress websites. Individually, they don't amount to much of a risk, but the more you have, the bigger the potential risk is. And so, since I was confident enough that I could do this and it would work, and it was only a minute's work, I figured I would do it. So that was that. I've then I realised that since I deleted SEO Press, I'm not creating Twitter card markup, and I've got no XML sitemap, despite WordPress supposedly doing that itself these days. More technical problems slowing me down. Can't wait to get to a point where everything is set up, which is definitely true. I feel like I've been saying I'm only a day or two away from finishing the site setup for ages now. It's really quite frustrating. So what I'm talking about there is, if you remember, in order to get rid of the site-wide canonical tags, I had to get rid of the SEO Press plugin that was creating them, and that I couldn't find a way of forcing it to stop creating them, so I had to delete it. I hadn't looked into all of the things that SEO Press does, but what I had noticed is that in my Twitter feed of these episodes, these cards were being created every time I put an episode out, which had the image from the associated web page and a brief description of what the episode was about, which looked quite good. I would like to keep that functionality, but since I turned SEO Press off, that has stopped. So the Twitter feed still exists, but now it's just a boring written description of the episode. It's not very eye-catching. So I definitely want to get that back. Although, having said that, as I'm sitting here saying it, there's little justification in putting any effort into getting it back. So maybe I should just move on. And the other thing is the XML sitemap. Essentially, it's a file that you can attach to a website that can tell Google, these are all the pages on my website, so you don't have to rely on Google finding them. And that has also disappeared. And I read around this a little bit and found that Google, since a fairly recent update, is supposed to be automatically creating XML sitemaps itself if you don't have a separate plugin that's doing it. So I looked at the page it suggested it should be at, and it was just a 404, which means a page that doesn't exist. So that doesn't seem to be working. And unlike the Twitter cards thing, which is just a preference, I think really having an XML sitemap is more like a sort of necessity. Even that, strictly speaking, it's not a necessity. But given that it should be no big deal to get one, I ought to do it. The only actual problem there is what I'm sort of battling with at the moment is that whilst I kind of like the fact that I've got rid of SEO Press, not least because I had to get rid of these site-wide canonicals, but also because it's a relatively chunky plugin, and to get rid of it and just replace it with one or two very small lightweight plugins felt like a good thing to do. But if it turns out ultimately to retain the functionality that I want, I'm actually going to have maybe 4 or 5 plugins, albeit smaller ones. I don't know if that's worth it, both in terms of maintenance and security. So what I am considering now is looking at Yoast, or I think there's one or two other fairly full-on SEO plugins that I'm guessing probably don't do sort of enforced site-wide canonicals and probably do the stuff that I'm now missing. So I'm just wondering about the possibility of getting one of them. The only problem is the time it takes to research what is the best, what isn't going to cause canonical issues, what features they have, to make sure that I'm installing something that actually is going to bring back the stuff that I need, and then also to take the time on 2 sites now of bringing the data, essentially the metadata is really what I'm talking about, that I've input into that more basic SEO plugin and putting it into the bigger one that I potentially start using. So it's sort of hours worth of work again at a time where I really don't want to be spending hours on that sort of thing. But I'm going to have to at least spend a bit more time thinking about it and then come to a decision. Right, and finally on to today. I decided to get a large memory card for my camera, and that is because I've really been struggling with the fact that I've had so many interruptions to work. I was just working it out earlier today, and this is now Thursday on week 7 of not being able to do a whole week of work. This has been the best week of the 7, in that I've only had 1 day off. But I think if you go back those 7 weeks and worked out the percentage of days I've been able to work, I suspect it's probably only around 50% at best, which is really annoying. And creating and processing these videos, or more the processing to be honest, is something which, if I was doing 5 days a week, 40 odd hours, it would be fine. I've got the process down, so it's fairly quick-ish now. Like, it still takes a while, but probably a bit less than a day. So if you're doing 5 days a week and you're spending maybe 3/4 of a day doing this task, which I think has value but is a bit secondary value, then that feels just about okay. But the amount of time it takes to process them doesn't decrease in proportion with how many there are. So if I'm only doing 50 days, 50% of my days that should be work days actually at work, that's obviously reducing the time I get to do work by half. But the amount of time I have to spend processing these videos doesn't decrease by half. So it's kind of getting in the way a bit too much at a very frustrating time of life. So what I've decided I'm going to do, or have a go at doing moving forward, is get an enormous memory card for my camera and just record the videos and then leave them potentially for ages, rather than just a week. Maybe leave them for a month or maybe even 2 months, and then do a huge batch process, which will take longer, but I bet I could do an entire month's worth in about, I'm going to guess, about a day and a half. So that would be a significant time saving, and not only would it save the time, but it would save the sort of interruption of it. So that's going to be the new idea there, I think. Nearly done. I got an email from that freelancer guy saying he wasn't going to invoice me for the advice that he'd provided so far, which he wasn't being cheeky. I'd specifically invited him to invoice me just for the advice since I'd solved my own problem, but I didn't want to feel like I'd wasted his time, but he said I didn't need to, so that was great. And finally, I've realised that the way I've been handling the transcription of these videos is not working very well. I've been putting a file on my laptop and then turning Otter transcription on the same laptop. So the audio file is getting played out of a laptop speaker and then recorded through a laptop microphone. And altogether, the loss of quality there means that the transcription is pretty poor. If you look on episodes, I think sort of 13 through to 19, I think it is, in their current state, and I say that because at some point in the future I might try and go back to them and make them better, but at the moment the transcription is really bad. You can sort of get a grip of what I'm talking about, but it does not make for pleasant reading. So I've decided the way I'm going to do it from now on, which I'm doing now for the first time, is to have Otter running on my phone just in front of me here, where, based on a test that I did, where I did it the old way, laptop to laptop, other way around, I found something to read, I read it with the phone turned on, transcribing, and then exported that audio file and did that exact same file, laptop to laptop, and the version that I'd done speaking straight into the phone was pretty much flawless. Just a couple of wrong commas here and there, but other than that it was fine. Whereas the one that was done laptop to laptop had 5 or 6 errors in probably just about 150 words worth of text. So that's the new way of doing that, which I think has the side benefit of taking slightly less time to process in the end as well. So that's it. That was a really long video, but at least we're caught up now. I am just going to break with tradition and have a quick mention of what's coming up, just because I sort of want to get it straight in my own head just now. So it's coming towards the end of Thursday. I've just got an hour or so to go now. After this, I'm going to do the September monthly update, which is going to be very quick because I've got very little to say, but it's already the 8th of October, so I want to just get that done and out of the way. And then I've got these remaining couple of technical things to look into. Firstly, the thing about copying specific web pages, that would be really useful if I could do that, so that's definitely worth looking into. And then the things about the Twitter cards and whatnot. But you know what? I think in talking to the camera right now, I've convinced myself that I shouldn't do that. So I think what I'll do is just put a note in the calendar for some time next spring, basically, to say you might want to get back on top of that. Because for now, I'm over it. I need to get on with creating some content. I need to get to a point where I see a little bit of traffic coming into the website to spur me on, because I just feel like I've put too much time, wasted too much time on the technicalities for a while now. Okay, so that's that, and I will be back in the office tomorrow.